During the opening months of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the eastern town of Izyum would become a key strategic target for the Russians. The Russians hoped to capture Izyum so they could strike south and encircle the Ukrainians holding the Donetsk front. In early March, Russian troops would start to engage Ukrainian defenders in Izyum. However, while the Ukrainians were holding, both the townsfolk and the defenders would be betrayed. On March 25th, a video from Izium's mayor, Valery Marchenko, posted by Maxim Sterling, would claim that while the army was defending the city, 4 men were in open collaboration with the Russians. City council deputies Anatoly Fomachevsky and Yuri Kozlov had been joined by former mayor Alexander Boskov and the former police officer Vladislav Sokolov. Mayor Marchenko would report that these 4 men were undermining the city's defenses by giving away Ukrainian positions and correcting artillery fire for the Russians. He would also lay out claims that these 4 men were gathering information on activists, the families of servicemen, ammunition depots, and businessmen inside of Izium. A day after, on the 26th of March, Russian forces would enter into Izium. However, just 3 days later on the 29th, Maxim Sterling would post again. He laid out that the advance on the 26th of March was not some coincidence, but that it was guided by Anatoly Fomachevsky. Fomachevsky was said to have brought the Russians through parts of Izium he knew were unprotected. Sterling laid out that if it hadn't been for Fomachevsky, the Russians would never have been able to make that advance and encircle Izium. For half a year, Russia occupied Izium, and during this time of occupation, over 1,000 people died. Russian collaborator Vladislav Sokolov would take up the role of acting mayor under occupation. While he paraded himself around with a horde of Russians, speaking about his big ideas for the future of Izium and just how helpful the Russians would be. Anyone who disagreed with them was met with Russia's standard occupation doctrine of looting, torture, and executions. 80% of Izium's infrastructure was destroyed. The majority of multi-level buildings, people's homes, hospitals, churches, schools. Nothing was sacred. Basic necessities, water, electricity, were completely cut off to the town. Food was held over people's heads by the Russians so that they could get them to comply and do what they wanted. And perhaps most infamously, over 440 bodies, the majority being civilian, were dumped in a mass grave outside of town. This would be the largest mass grave we'd found since the Yugoslav genocide. The treatment of Ukrainians in this Russian-speaking town would be well documented by both the citizens of the town as well as the Russian occupiers.
Hey, you over there, wake up from Putin's propaganda. You are killing us here, raping children, burning us alive, you scum. We aren't the ones who came to you in Rostov or Voronezh, bringing misery, grief, and war. Have we done anything bad to you? We are just hard-working people. Wake up, you. I don't have anything. My house burned today. My dog is all I have left, named Filya.
You're look. That's our house. What's left of it. Look. All gone. All damaged, ruined, nothing left. Mom is left with nothing of her own. Only the clothing that was on me when I ran outside.
As far as truly cruel things go, it happened during the last days we were there, to someone I knew from the neighboring block. In the broad daylight, a shell exploded. The woman was outside in her garden. Her guts were all over the yard. The Chechen guy who did it went down on his knees in front of her, prayed, and said, "Forgive me, mother." And then he left. Forgive for what? You are going to say our Ukrainian forces did it anyway.
Unfortunately today, they, Ukrainians, shelled the city on purpose, on May 9th. If you can hear in the background, shelling nearby. On purpose to crap on the Victory Day. But our victory cannot be disgraced by anything. But if you want to be the Nazis who don't need it, we already formed a military and civil administration here. Very nice. Guys working. Even cleaned the square up before May 9th. Beautiful. It wasn't as beautiful here before us, as you know well. But this is the central square. Still in Ukrainian, but everything is going to be in Russian soon. But of course, we are not going to forbid speaking Ukrainian. We are trying to prevent their plan to do the opposite over here.
Дядьку. Да. Стреляют. Стреляют. Да.
I arrived in Izium just 7 months after liberation. Much in the same way that I had done Buch, Irpin, and Borodyanka, I wanted to see how these places were surviving after occupation. Unlike the time of reconstruction that I found to the north of Kiev, however, here I only found the crippling realities of what it's like to live so close to Russia.
Підпадають під переслідування. На жаль, вимушений саме так казати.
And there was like office buildings there. This was like a station for like buses and cars and stuff like that.
My friend Ukrainian Anna helped set up this trip, and she would be our go-between between our guide and the camera. Our local guide declined to be filmed.
Like reconstructed that thing so people could cross it.
А ми зараз от там заїдемо, станемо сфоткаємо.
You're gonna stand, go outside and you can take a pic if you want.
However, some of the first places our guide wanted to show us were the schools of Izium, all of whom had been turned to rubble. Okay.
Вот как раз проедешь вот это вот здание, вот видишь.
Ага. Ну, возле церкви я буду. Да?
I want to talk about my visits to the hospital there. I came in for a checkup and soldiers were there with machine guns in front of the hospital. What are you doing there? People came there to get help with their ailments, in hopes that someone could help. Because nothing worked, no working pharmacies or shops. Everything was looted and broken. And they were laughing, asking me, "Where are you going to, Granny?" On the dance floor, young men. Where else? They said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need a doctor." They said, "Off you go then." I was so angry at them.
Myth without shut
Ломать не строить.
This photo of Anastasia I do really like a lot. I think it kind of explains Izium down to a core. It is a testimony without a proper audience, or more accurately, not given a proper audience. Organizations like the Human Rights Watch would report that while Ukrainians took protection to stay away and protect their civilians, the Russians would target them during the course of battle.
Oh, siren.
Yep.
Yep.
These civilian apartment blocks were targeted. In the Human Rights Watch report, they believe that this level of damage is consistent with a large aerial bomb with a delayed action fuse. I'm no expert in weaponeering, but from my understanding, that is only done when you wish to take down a building.
Thing, something like that, yeah? So in this building that collapsed, as you can see, there was like 50 or 60 people who were killed just here. So some of them died instantly, some of them were in the basement hiding, and people could not pull them out because of the shellings, of constant shellings. So basically they just starved and, died of thirst and stuff like that. So around 50-60 people died just in this house alone.
Human Rights Watch obtained floor plans from local authorities, which combined with photographs, drone footage, and sketches from survivors, allowed us to assess the building structure before and after the attack. We show the attack ripped the building in half, resulting in a hole at least 15 meters wide. 5 stories of concrete and metal collapsed onto the people sheltering in the basement. Generations of families were killed in the attack.
The attack happened while Ukrainian forces were defending the area, but none of the survivors reported seeing or hearing Ukrainian forces in or directly around the building at the time of the attack. Human Rights Watch found no evidence of established firing positions used by Ukrainian forces in the building. This deadly attack violates the laws of war that require warring parties to distinguish between civilians and combatants and to take all feasible precautions to protect civilians. Those responsible should be held to account.
This is the building where our guide says her friends lived, and wife was killed instantly when the strike was done. But the husband survived, and he was in the bathroom, so he was lucky, and he kind of crawled through the rooftop and crawled down on the tube. So this is something that just happens to people. They're just having just a regular time, living their lives, and then boom, and someone that you love is dead, and you yourself can be maimed or injured or hurt. She said like in many buildings here would be like pictures and flowers and stuff like that.
It was actually at this site that the occupation mayor, Vladislav Sokolov, would float the idea of having a brigade set up to find bodies around Izium and bury them. The New Yorker actually has a really great account from the foreman of this brigade. He had talked about going around town and collecting bodies, and then where the burial site for them would be chosen, which was right next to the graveyard in a small pine grove. This, of course, would be the site of the mass grave.
As far as violence goes, there was this guy I knew. We didn't know where he was for a week. But when he reappeared, he was severely beaten up, with bruised kidneys, and Russian soldiers forced him to load corpses. And they told him, when you finish loading these corpses, you will join them. But he managed to escape from this horror. He was loading the corpses for days, but then ran for his life. They warned us about our men from the get-go. If your husband or boyfriend did not return home, you should go to the 10th base. If you don't get there fast, then we will send them to dig trenches and load corpses. And these were our new masters of the city. This wasn't just an occupation, and they weren't heroic liberators, as they say, bringing some Russian peace world to us. These were invaders, akin to beasts.
We were warned while entering the area of the mass grave that it was booby-trapped. The Russians had used this area to park their tanks and build trenches, shooting at the road at any car they didn't like. But while they were retreating, they had enough time, apparently, to lay landmines and tie grenades with strings around them, like tripwires, so that anyone going toward the mass grave would have to deal with this. Ukrainian officials and foreign journalists have confirmed that the majority of victims discovered in the mass grave met with a violent end, with at least 30 showing obvious signs of torture.
There are bodies with a rope around the neck, with hands tied with broken limbs and with gunshot wounds. Several men had their genitals amputated. All this is evidence of the terrible torture to which the occupiers subjected the residents of Izium.
There were over 1,000 people that died in Izium during the hostilities. In the mass grave just behind us here, there were over 440 bodies found. Izium has much to mourn. Occupation Mayor Vladislav Sokolov, for his part, ran away when the Kharkiv counteroffensive started. Him and the 3 other collaborators, to my knowledge, all fled to Russia, living probably decent lives, without any accountability for what they had done.
Less of a shock, I guess.
Я думаю, они не просто так лентами.
Ukrainian forces retook this frontline stronghold in the Kharkiv region after thousands of Russian troops fled the area. Ukrainian officials say they found a mass burial site of at least 440 bodies, mainly civilians, in the northeastern city of Izyum after it was recaptured from Russian forces. Proof, they said, of war crimes carried out by the invaders in a territory they occupied for months.
Russia is leaving death behind it everywhere and must be held responsible. The world must bring Russia to real responsibility for this war. We will do everything for this.
When I remember my time in Izium, I remember just how heavy the air was. It was like every step was dragging you down and down and down. I remember walking the forest of death. I remember I can't even describe to you the feeling of walking the site of a mass grave, of a recent mass grave. I can't put it into words. I remember learning that just 30 minutes after we had walked the site of the mass graves, an elderly resident of Izium went there to mourn a loved one. She stepped on a landmine and died. Today, only half of the pre-war population lives in Izium. People do their best. I mean, they try to rebuild their homes, try to really rebuild their lives. But life is hard here. And you know, it really doesn't have to be. If we in the West were serious, you've heard it before. Places like this are known. Buch, Irpin, Borodyanka, Saltivka, Kupiansk, Izyum, Bakhmut, Kherson, Avdiivka, Vovchansk, Chasiv Yar, Pokrovsk, Mariupol. Izyum is by far the worst place I have gone in Ukraine. And the reality is, there are many Izyums being made every day by Russia. And to think that Izyum was once known for its strawberry festivals.